Coming up right now, the newest episode from Carr, Gwyn, and Ode on Three Pagans and a Cat.
There is nothing so secular that it cannot be sacred, and that is one of the deepest messages of the Incarnation. Welcome to First Steps, Sacred Spaces, the 21st episode of Three Pagans and a Cat. Our opening today is courtesy of 20th century fiction writer Madeleine L'Engle. You may call me Ode.
You can call me Carr. I'm Ode's father.
Merry meet. My name is Gwyn, Ode's mother.
And if we sound strange this week, it's because we are in a new recording location, which sounds super echoey to me.
It is a little echoey, yeah.
So, how this turns out in the final edit remains to be seen. We haven't had an opportunity to do any, testing and test out our editing in this location because...
We just got the computer set up today.
Literally a few hours ago.
Yeah.
So, listeners, you may remember that we were moving 2 weeks ago, right after basically we recorded our last episode.
So 3 weeks ago.
So 3 weeks ago, and things didn't go according to plan.
No, not even close. Yeah.
And it's still being a challenge.
We're still working on it.
We're still basically without furniture.
Yeah. We just got most of the carpets in. Finally.
All of the vinyl.
All the vinyl's in. Most of the carpet's in. It's not tacked down everywhere.
And all of our furniture is living at a storage place.
Right, it's in a storage location because we don't want to bring it in here until the carpet's, done.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll just tear it up, and that will be a disaster.
And a lot of repair work had to be done on the house itself.
Yeah, it wasn't...
And cleaning, which Ode and I have been doing the past week.
It just wasn't ready for us, basically. The contractor who told us he would be done wasn't, and then he gave us another date that he would be done, and it still wasn't, and finally we just said, go away, and we'll handle it from here.
Yeah, fired him.
And we're still trying to sort through the mess.
But we're getting there. I think by the end of this week, we will actually be moved into our new home.
The good news is that we're also recording next Sunday for the Samhain episode.
So we missed our recording last week.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we warned you guys about. Because of the situation, we were in here. There was no carpet on the floor, so it would have been even more echoey. We couldn't bring any of our furniture or our recording equipment in because the house was not ready to have any of that in it. We couldn't even have
sat in this room.
No. There was a smell experience happening in the recording room.
Which we have spent the last week
combating. And it's fine now, but it did take a week.
Yes, it did.
We couldn't record last week, and consequently we had to delay until this week. As a result, you're going to be getting an episode next week as well, so that we can get back on schedule, and that's going to be our Samhain episode.
I'm so excited. I'm really looking forward to that episode. But I'm looking
forward
to this episode,
I've been looking forward to this episode a lot, too. This is the next in our First Steps series. Last episode, we covered grounding, centering, and shielding. Mm-hmm. This episode, we're going to be covering sacred spaces. In this series, we just sort of go into the nittier, grittier details of some of these concepts that are very common in many paths and traditions in paganism, but which are frequently just sort of assumed knowledge and don't get a lot of explication. So we're trying to sort of unveil some of these things.
Which is good for me because I don't know any of them anyway.
Exactly.
Works out well.
It works well.
The good news is, though, with this move, is that Gwyn is no longer working a full-time job.
That's true. I have time to dedicate to this podcast.
Right, yeah. So Gwyn and Ode will be spending the majority of their time working on the podcast. And they're both currently doing readings for people at Arts and Craft in Hartford, Michigan.
Yep.
So Gwyn is on Sundays from 1 to 5.
Yep.
And Ode is on Thursdays from noon to 5?
Yes, from noon to 5. I have not started at Arts and Craft yet. I will be starting the 18th, I believe.
Because
I'm going to be doing Thursday tarot readings at Arts and Craft, but this upcoming Thursday, the 11th, is the Witch's Tea in Flint, which Gwyn and I already had an obligation to attend as readers.
That's right.
So I won't be able to start to Arts and Craft until the week following that.
But if you're in the area, please come and visit us. We would love to meet you, greet you, do a reading for you if you so choose. Today was my first day. I really enjoyed it. I was honored to be able to use the reading room, which is beautiful, at Arts and Craft. And that some people
wanted readings.
Right, came in and got readings from
and trusted me, because it really comes down to trusting someone to do a reading for you.
Yep.
So I appreciated it.
And you all will also be available via Skype for people who can't make it to our location in Michigan.
That's right.
Yep.
to be able to do Skype readings so that they can do that. And if you go on our website and look under, I believe it's Services.
Yep.
You can find those services listed there, except for Odes, which will be up in a little while.
Yeah, I haven't been offering services until just now. So.
Right, yep.
You can also find my services located on Facebook at Gwyn of Three Pagans and a Cat, where you can actually schedule services with me on Facebook.
I don't have that because, man, do I hate Facebook.
Gotta get over that.
As
kid.
anyone in our group is probably aware by the fact of my extremely infrequent presence there.
That would probably be.
That's true. That's true.
Since it's the first one of this month, should I take care of reading?
Yes, we have
our wonderful patrons.
We have a bunch of lovely patrons who support us every month.
Which we so appreciate. You have no idea how much you help us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. We have 7 kittens
Woo-hoo.
whose names we don't read.
But we do love them.
kittens.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't everyone really love kittens?
I mean, come on. Everybody loves kittens.
Car's making a face.
Even you,
But
Car,
he has
love
loved kittens in the past. He's loved my kitten, Gabriel, who was the best
I
kitten.
could name Flynn and Shadow, who is our
mascot.
mascot for this podcast.
And
So-
someday we'll have a future kitten. He's still giving us a look. All right,
Still
continue.
giving us a look. All
All
right.
right. Our cats are Amy Scholes, Aaron Mao, Gary Bearstorm, Kay Krimmer, and Susan DeHaan.
All excellent names, you guys. Good job.
We do love those.
Our hunters are Charles Howison, Carly, Kara Tiergarten, Lorelei, Stevie Thomason, Tally Kazoil Thompson, and Vex Arcana.
Also, primo quality names.
I'm glad you're happy with everybody's names. We do have a tiger, and that's Akaneko,
Yay.
who we have met in person.
Yes,
Yes.
we have.
Kinda cool. So,
She
and also
actually
helped us
us
move.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was great.
Really
It was very
appreciate it,
convenient.
Akaneko. Thank you.
And our
Jaguar.
is Justin Stanage. And that's all of our
Who's
patrons.
probably used to that treatment by
Probably,
now.
yeah.
We've also met Justin in person.
Yes,
We
have,
did.
yeah.
We loved
It was
Justin.
great, yeah.
Thank you guys so much for helping us out and sponsoring this podcast. It's going to help us eliminate the echo in this room.
Hopefully,
Right.
eventually.
Eventually we'll be able to get A, the sound shields we need so that we can use the 3 mics that we do actually have now.
Right.
B, get some soundproofing in this room so that it doesn't sound like this forever.
Right.
So if you want to help us keep this podcast not only going, but also improving, you can support us on Patreon.
Exactly. And you can find that link actually on every episode.
Yep.
Or on our Facebook page.
That's right.
Yep.
And our website.
Yeah, it's on the main page of the
It's
website.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Just
So-
look for it. You'll find it.
Yep.
So, sacred spaces.
Yep.
That's the topic for
Yeah.
this week.
Yep.
It's one of those, again, like very commonly referenced concepts. Often at the start of a ritual, it will just say like cast a circle or call the quarters or something like that. And it will never explain what that is supposed to actually look like, what you're supposed to actually do there. So that's why I, especially when I was younger, was very frustrated by things like this. It was just assumed that I would have absorbed this information osmotically somehow.
Right.
But because my mother thought I was too young for witchcraft, I didn't have access to all the information, and I didn't have like the internet wasn't as accessible then.
Yeah.
If I could do things different now, I would have trained you right as soon as I knew you had an interest. However, I
You were cautious.
was cautious. I was coming out of a organized Abrahamic religion and still had my own issues that I was dealing with.
Baggage. Yeah.
Baggage.
Bagage.
Bagage.
That was a good one.
That was good.
Good job, stereo system.
All right,
If you ever meet us in person, you'll note that Gwyn and I do this a lot. We don't do it very often on the podcast, but in person we do the stereo like mind reading thing frequently.
Yep.
And everything's not a music reference, or we don't just end
I know.
randomly singing, except for me.
Or quoting movies.
Right, yeah.
We actually keep it together on the podcast. In person, we're just a mess of pop culture references.
That is true. That is very true.
All right, okay, focus in.
Okay,
focus up.
Sacred space.
Sacred space. Eventually, this podcast room will be sacred space.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, because the podcast room is going to be a multi-purpose room. We're going to do readings here, do meditations here.
Yep.
So we're going to have to dedicate this space
Yes.
in an assortment of ways.
That's right.
Yeah.
But first, maybe we should talk about what we've done for the house, because Gwyn and I did a general house clearing and sort of space setting.
So you wanted to get rid of the guy I fired?
Yes,
Yes,
that.
we totally
that
wanted
was
to do
an
that.
important component, yeah.
Absolutely. And we really had limited supplies because most of our
Most of our
stuff
stuff
is
was all packed up.
Boxes, yeah.
But thankfully, we found my apothecary and pulled all that out and got that into the cupboards. And so we got some sage and we got Palo Santo,
And sweetgrass.
sweetgrass. And we went
Sweetgrass
around
braid that we've had for a long time. You guys got it at
at a powwow 2 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
And it was a long braid, and I'm down to about a quarter of it now.
Yeah.
But it's been wonderful. And what we did is we started at one of the entryways, and we had the smoking going on.
Yep.
And we just walked the perimeter.
Yep, made a circuit.
Made
a full
a
circuit of the
circuit.
house. All the exterior walls and windows.
The windows, the closets, everywhere. Just cleansing the space.
Which is the first step to making a sacred space.
Yes, it is.
A sacred space is really just a place. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a physical space. It could be something that you carry with you like a tidal wave that just ebbs and flows around your feet. But a sacred space is a place where you do work.
Exactly.
Sacred work.
Yep.
Okay. So I think of a sacred space as being like Stonehenge or Angkor Wat or Newgrange.
Monuments.
Or the Pyramid of Egypt, Machu Picchu, those
Right.
kind of things as being sacred spaces.
And they are.
They are,
Right.
absolutely.
Those are very big, grand, dramatic monuments of sacred
Exactly.
space.
Okay. What would then be a personal sacred space?
It can vary. My room is usually a sacred space to various degrees. Places in my room, in front of my altars especially, are very specifically defined sacred spaces. And then, like I was saying, if you are skilled with working with energy, with your own personal shields and grounding and centering, like we talked about last episode, you should and probably will be able to create a sort of localized sacred space just around
Basically,
yourself.
Yeah, wherever you go can become a sacred space if you know how to
Set your shields and
set your
intentions.
shields and your intentions. For me, my plants in our previous home, the balcony where I kept my plants,
Right.
that was a sacred space because I worked with plants out there. My altar that was dedicated to witchcraft, that was a sacred space for me. Also, the little section of the family altar that had my brigade.
So I can see
Swan,
the ability
yeah.
to make an altar into a sacred space.
Right.
And I can see the ability to make a temporary sacred space somewhere if you need it.
Right.
Okay, how do you take a sacred space with you with it wherever you go? Because
Okay.
that one I don't get.
Okay. Do you mean like those little matchbox altars and little like mint tin altars? Because that's one way.
Right, okay.
That's
Yeah.
one way, especially
Okay.
if you need a physical, tangible thing to be your sacred space.
Which I
Right.
think are very clever, and I'm starting to see them more and more at pagan stores. They've
gotten very popular, yeah.
Yeah, they're very popular. They can be very small and very portable and
stealthy.
Stealthy.
Yeah.
Right.
But even if you don't have like the physical sacred space thing, we talked about shielding last episode, and I talked about how I extend my mantle and create a shield with it, right?
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made that everything inside that shield is a sacred space. It's a space I have dedicated to myself for my work and made safe.
Okay.
How I usually visualize it is, have you ever stepped in a puddle and just like stood in the middle of it and watched the ripples spread out from your feet?
No, but I've seen other people do it.
Okay, I've done that because I'm that person.
I wasn't allowed to.
And how I visualize sort of a personal sacred space that's just sort of tied to me, to my physical location, is just that the fabric of reality ripples where I step. And inside the boundaries of my shield is the puddle of my sacred space.
Okay, so question. I think it was yesterday. Yeah, yesterday we went to Benton Harbor and just ran around a bunch of stores.
Right.
Looking for bric-a-brac to eventually put into the home.
Yep.
So was your sacred space with you then?
It could have been. It actually wasn't in that moment, but I did have it active in the car. So we drove around a little bit and we were driving through a part of Southwest Michigan that I wasn't familiar with, and I was sort of getting a feel on the land out there and enjoying the space through the window. And I rooted down to get a feel on the earth there. And we were moving, we were in a car.
Right.
My roots moved with me, my sacred space, my personal protected bubble of self moved with me as the car was moving, because it's not attached to a physical thing, it's attached to me.
And like, for instance, when I walk outside, I can put my feet in the ground, stop, and just open myself to nature, to the earth, to listening to the wind. And for me, that becomes a sacred space. Ode and I went to Lake Michigan in St. Joseph a week ago, I think 2 weeks ago, and sitting on the beach, meditating, listening to the water, that became a sacred space for me. I really do believe it depends on, for me, a lot of times it depends on intention and what's going on at the time.
Now, I'm curious. I always visualize a sacred space as having very clearly defined borders. Do you do that? Or to you, does it just become like an expanse of sacredness until you stop thinking about it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And I wonder if that's just a difference between our personalities or a difference between our paths. Heathen Reed does have like a focus on inner and outer layers. And I wonder if, right. And I wonder if that contributes to my focus on very rigidly defined sacred spaces.
Right.
Probably. And because I am an eclectic witch. So for me, it really does, it's defined by me.
Right.
So sometimes I cast a circle. If I'm doing a specific working, do meditation or to do casting or any kind of work, I'll create a sacred space by casting a circle. But as I said, because I'm a green witch, just walking out into nature, that becomes sacred space to me, especially when my intentions are focused on that.
The space just becomes sacred in a sort of an undirected swath out until it stops being inside of your sort of purview.
Exactly.
Interesting.
My understanding of the sacred space would be like, you would need to cleanse the area, energize it, open a portal, that kind of a thing.
Right, the whole
system of that thing.
Right.
So you don't need to do that?
I think it varies from tradition to tradition.
It does. I think it varies from tradition to tradition, but I also think it varies from person to person. As an eclectic witch, I don't have to have all that rigid, specific boundaries all the time. Sometimes I do. A lot of times it depends on the work that I'm doing. Sometimes I just don't.
Sometimes when I'm putting up, so I mentioned I think of sacred spaces as having very defined borders.
Right.
That doesn't mean that those borders are necessarily non-permeable. Sometimes I deliberately set the edges of my sacred space to permit the entrance of certain spirits.
Right.
So for instance, when I was doing my reading today, I went into the reading room because I'd never been in there before. I wanted to get to know the space a little bit. Beautiful space. But I did set it up as a sacred space for spirits to enter, even though I wasn't in there the whole time. Went in and out. People came in with me and left.
Right.
But I set that up for the time that I was going to be occupying it from 1 to 5. That was a sacred space for me to enter and for spirit to enter and interact with me.
Gotcha.
Now, there are some traditions, especially in Wicca, where once a circle is cast, you can't cross the circle. If you need to leave the circle for any reason, you have to cut a door into the circle so that you can leave, get whatever you need, and come back. And then the circle has to be reclosed. And we'll get into sort of some specifics on that maybe in a little bit. But
Right. And when I created that sacred space, I didn't cast a circle. It was just, I dedicated that space to the work I was doing that day.
Right.
Okay. I guess coming from Christianity, I look at sacred spaces as, for instances, would be an altar.
Right. A church. A temple.
A church, a temple.
Tabernacle.
Even like when I was doing stuff that was considered oddball in Christianity, like the 24/7 prayer rooms.
And which are in like warehouses.
Right.
And, yeah.
Those would become at least sacred spaces while I was there because of the prayer and stuff that we put into it leading up to it.
Okay.
And I think that's the most technical definition of sacred space, which a lot of people follow, and I think that's fine.
I'm curious, though, in Christianity, because I wasn't really involved in that. I mean, I was a little bit involved, but I didn't, like, engage with it in a, like, emotional sense.
Yeah, you left with it when you were like 9.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
What was the process of sacredizing a space in Christianity?
Well, I think it depends on the sect of Christianity.
Yeah, right.
Because we were mostly involved in non-denominational, charismatic-y type churches, though I didn't really fall into that personally, but because we were involved in churches that were like that, it tended to be just like prayer.
So you just pray in a space and that made it sacred.
God's presence is what made it sacred and holy.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit coming down.
Right.
I think for many pagans, too, who might believe that God is in everything.
Which is panentheism.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
For panentheists, God is in everything. Us.
Right. Interpenetrating.
Interpenetrating anything, so that makes everything a sacred space.
Okay. Just asking questions.
Yeah, no, that's...
No, that's the whole
part
point.
part of the series.
That's very true, yeah. I'm the question asker.
Question
Question
asker.
asker?
Yeah.
Good one.
I'm making up words.
Sounds good.
You did mention an interesting point, which is about cleansing a space.
Right.
That's a pretty common step in creating a sacred space, especially at the early stages, especially if it's going to be a permanent sacred space. For temporary sacred spaces, it doesn't happen as often or as thoroughly necessarily. Sometimes there will be incense or sage that'll be wafted over participants before they enter a circle to make them spiritually clean before they enter it.
Right.
And sometimes
Blessed
the general
water.
right, sometimes the general area will be asperged with water or smoked. But a lot of times people cast a circle in a completely uncleansed area, and it's part of the circle casting does a cleansy thing. Is my understanding.
Okay.
I don't actually cast circles.
Right.
Me, personally.
And that would be where what I would believe is that I can go anywhere, cast a circle, and that place becomes a sacred space.
And it becomes automatically
It
cleansed.
becomes automatically cleansed.
Interesting.
But
see,
I know that there are traditions who don't believe that,
Right.
and that's perfectly fine.
Well, and I don't necessarily believe that a cleansing is appropriate in all circumstances. If you're trying to connect with the spirit of a particular place, it's not going to be practical for you necessarily to cleanse it ahead of time.
Right.
Because, congratulations, you just evicted the person you were going to talk to.
Right.
That's right. That's right. And for instance, when Ode and I went around and we were cleansing the house because we're getting ready to build wards and we wanted to get the
Make
negative
sigils all over the wall.
make sigils and things like that. What we did when we used that smoke was, and I used Florida water on the floors earlier and through as much of the flooring, the subfloor as I could.
Right. Since we didn't have carpet.
Yeah.
We just do it in its barest.
Yeah,
minimum.
so there was this whole place pretty much got Florida watered.
Baking soda and peroxided.
Yeah, exactly.
And bleach.
Among other things.
Mouthwash.
Among other things. I spoke an incantation to remove negative energy while Ode.
I unbound the whites.
Exactly.
I had done some reading with my tarot in the house to sort of introduce myself and say hey and check what they wanted. We still haven't worked out what the offering schedule is going to be. But what I kept getting from them was that they had felt trapped and constrained under the previous tenants or maybe the previous several tenants. So I was unbinding the whites and waking them up and, again, introducing myself and attaching myself to the house. Making a covenant with the whites that I would uplift and uphold them and the house if they would uplift and uphold me and my work. Which, because this is a house and it has house whites in it, at least as far as I'm concerned. Right. And part of my practice is interaction with those spirits and good relationship with them. This house is sacred just by virtue of them being in it.
Right.
The degree to which it is sacred depends on my relationship with those whites. So right now, we have a very tenuous relationship. We haven't set up an offering schedule yet. We've had very few conversations. But over time, I will be trying to build trust with those whites and a good faith relationship with them. And once that's in place, the house will become, at least for me, much more sacred, increasingly sacred. And a safer and stronger place.
Right.
And for me, my next step is to do the outside, which my goal for next week is to clean around the outside, get any trash or glass or things that we're finding in the
Detritus.
grass, the detritus from the previous contractor and among other things,
etc.
Right.
Go around and clean the space as well as prepare the area for any kind of gardening, that kind of thing that will happen next spring. At the same time, I'm also going to be introducing myself to the property, to the trees that surround us. And that's the wonderful thing about this space. From the moment I stepped on it, I felt very welcome. And I think that's important for anyone to feel welcome in the space that they're going to.
I don't know that I felt welcomed in the same way that Gwyn felt welcomed. But I felt very positive about the house the first moment I got into it and when we were standing on the grounds. It's a good house. It's, like I said, it felt very suppressed to me. So I didn't it was hard for me to get a good active read on it.
Right.
And like I said, we haven't really established lines of communication yet. But it's a good house and I think it will come to feel sacred to me.
Right.
And I know that we are planning to do work outside in the backyard for sabbats and different rituals that we're planning to do in the back.
And the more work you do in a place,
the more sacred it becomes.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've read, because,
Right.
I actually look at things before we do these podcasts.
Shocking, I know.
I know. Gosh, it's not anything like high school or college for me where I just oh that's the answer, and if it's not, too bad. One of the things I read was that if you were going to create a sacred space in your home, such as an altar or a meditation area or something to that effect, that you should make it an area that other people in your household would not disturb. But we're talking about making our whole house a sacred space.
Kind of. We're not talking about making our whole house an altar. Necessarily, or a place where...
And I think, again, that comes down to what the definition of sacred space is.
Well, I think there are just different layers of sacredness.
So levels?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just different degrees, I guess, of sacredness. So the house is sacred to me because the whites live in it. My individual personal warded space is sacred to me on a slightly different level because that's a space that I have specifically told spirits, here's where you can get in contact with me. You can come in through this window. You can't leave through this door. The rest of the house, those wards are preeminent. In my room, my wards are preeminent. Okay. Right? Then in front of my altars, which aren't set up yet, because I just now got all my boxes with my altar things in them.
And nothing to put them on.
Nothing to put them on, yeah.
You could set them up all
on
the
floor.
boxes.
Yeah, on the boxes, yeah. My individual altars, when they're set up again, will be sacred for specific purposes. Right. So my ancestor altar is sacred for doing work with my ancestors, but I don't do other kinds of work there. It's not sacred for that purpose. It's very specifically tuned to this one thing. Okay. Then I have altars for my deities, altars for just doing work. I have an altar, or I had an altar in the previous apartment where things just became sacred. It was a place that I said, this is a sacred space. I set up boundaries around it, and I established an intention for sacredness to flow into that space from me, from the gods, from the ancestors, from the whites. And tools went there to become sacred as the first stage of enlivening.
Well, for instance...
So like I don't know, some stones?
Yes, some stones.
Some stones.
I see.
Some stones would go there.
I see what's happening.
And it would be part of Oats! Stone! Corner! Was it actually a corner?
It was actually a corner.
And, and actually, that sounds really good in this room. I've just got to say, maybe we should put soundproofing on the wall, because that really worked.
It was on the top of my corner desk. Yes, actually.
There you go. So
where
perfect.
that altar was.
So I named this correctly. Go ahead.
All right. So this is appropriate because I was just talking about tuning a space, and we're going to be talking about a stone that's very programmable. We're going to be talking about clear quartz. We've talked about other varieties of quartz like amethyst and citrine, and a lot of stones are quartz variants, frankly. Quartz is the second most abundant mineral on Earth's continental crust.
What's the most?
Feldspar.
Oh, feldspar.
Feldspar is the most abundant mineral on Earth.
Huh.
And quartz is the second most abundant. Okay. It is a silicon dioxide, so its chemical composition is 1 silicon and 2 oxygen molecules. Because it's the most common mineral of its type, of a crystal like this, because feldspar is not a crystal, you find it used extremely frequently. Okay. In pretty much all of its variations, but especially in clear quartz, which is the most common of even the other quartz variants. It had prehistoric use as stone tools. So during the lithic period, stone tools were made with quartz. They were napped into axe heads and spears and things like that in some parts of Europe especially. It was used to produce art and decorative items. Vases were made out of, so sort of the same things that were made out of jade in Asia. Vases and funerary items and urns and plates and bowls and decorative things of all kinds were made out of jade in Asia and were made out of quartz in Europe and in like South America. Okay. Because quartz tends to be pretty easy to mine. It tends to be close top layer mineral.
To the surface, gotcha.
Yep. And that continued into the mid-19th century. It was used to create extremely high value art objects because you could find relatively large quartz specimens to carve like whole objects out of. So there would be whole vases carved out of a single piece of quartz. Gotcha. And those were extremely high value art objects until about the mid-19th century when it fell out of favor. Mostly now it's used in jewelry and as witchy pagan paraphernalia.
There we go. Okay.
Quartz actually has some really interesting properties that I think relate to its correspondences today. We've talked a little bit previously about how I think correspondence has come about. Here's an example. So quartz is a piezoelectric substance. What that means is that if it is subjected to pressure, it produces a small electrical charge. Okay. The mineral itself produces a small electrical charge. That's actually how it's used in watchmaking. The inverse is also true. When subjected to a small electrical charge, it deforms slightly, the crystal does, and at a specific frequency. So in a watch, the battery in the watch creates a small electrical charge to the quartz cell. The quartz cell vibrates at a specific frequency while it's deforming, and that is used to set the rotation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
the rotation of the gears, so that the watch stays constant. That's why quartz watches don't have to be wound.
Gotcha.
It's also triboluminescent. Triboluminescence is a quality of mineral where if you rub two pieces of quartz together at the right speed and angle and frequency and everything, it produces light.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah,
I
scientists...
really want to try this.
And it's sometimes mistaken for electricity, but it's not. It's just a mechanically generated luminescence. Scientists aren't completely sure why it happens. They think it's due to the breakdown of certain chemicals in the composition, but it's very specific instance of this mineral producing both energy in the form of electricity and energy in the form of light.
Interesting.
Independently.
Very cool.
Right.
So quartz, metaphysically, has the quality of being what we call highly tunable. So clear quartz on its own is basically just clean. It's clean energy. It doesn't have like a strong tone of its own. It doesn't have desires or impulses the way other stones have like areas of interest. Quartz is a little aloof, but it's very practical and workmanlike. So you can take a piece of quartz and set an intention for it, and it will essentially change the way it processes to reflect that intention you've set, which is different from how other stones are. The way other stones tend to work is that they have a thing that interests them, a thing that they do very well, and you can use them to do that thing. Quartz will come to you, unless it's been tuned by someone else, will come to you basically at a null state, and you can tune it to do a specific thing.
Does that make it easier to find a piece of quartz that works with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Quartzes are you can pick up like a dozen pieces of quartz and pretty much all of them will work for you. It's not nearly as finicky as like an obsidian where you have to find the right one, or labradorite where like 1 out of 100 will be the right piece of labradorite. Quartz is, because it's so versatile, because it can be tuned so easily, because it comes with such a clean, natural frequency, it's not picky about who picks it up. It's willing to do most things. I've never had a quartz refuse to work with me or refuse to do any specific thing or be tuned for any specific purpose.
Interesting.
I brought quartz to this because it's so tunable. You can use it when you're creating sacred spaces to help focus the intention of a sacred space. And then every time, so you asked like, how would you bring a portable sacred space with you? You could tune a piece of quartz to create sort of waves of sacred space around it.
Gotcha.
And then everywhere you brought that quartz, you would bring a certain layer of sacredness with you.
How did the only piece of quartz I've ever found run away from me?
I don't know.
Oh,
Carr found a piece of quartz just lying around because it's the second most common mineral on Earth.
A little bitty thing.
Little bitty piece of quartz. And he was showing it to me and I dropped it down the back of the couch and it's gone forever.
No, it's in the couch, making the couch sacred.
No, I don't think it was probably ever tuned. So it's just making the couch clean.
Making
All right.
the couch clean.
That's it for Odes Stone Corner!
Very dramatic.
It is very nice. The neighbors are probably going, what the fuck?
The neighbors can deal with it.
All right, cool. Where were we going after this?
Still talking about sacred spaces.
I had been talking about the altar where I just put tools to acquire energy.
And I wanted to say, when my father passed away, I created what I was basically calling a remembrance for him, which is one of those photo frames that has digital photos in it of him. I had flowers, I had a candle, I had a little offering dish that had some stones in it. And that, for me, became a sacred space, a remembrance.
It became a shrine.
A shrine for my dad. And it has helped keep him in,
in your thoughts.
In my thoughts every
Right.
time I see that. Of course, he does come visit and talk to me every now and then.
That's what being a spiritual medium means.
That's right. So sometimes my daddy will pop in and say hi and tell me he wants his granddaughter to try chicken liver.
Yep.
Right.
So,
This is not new news.
this is not new. But
I've been
anyway.
trying to get you doing it for eons.
But that was, my intention was not originally to make a shrine necessarily, but that is what it became.
Right.
Additionally, I had an altar space that was...
It was supposed to be just seasonal decoration.
It was supposed to be seasonal decoration. It was intuitively created as an altar. And I think for me, that a lot of the time is what happens in my altar spaces. For me, creating an altar, it's basically an intuitive process. So I wanted to put my plants on a table near a window. And then eventually I added stones. I added little objects that were important to me as a pagan, and lo and behold, it became an altar. It became a green altar. And then when we created our family altar, that was a sacred space right there in the middle of our living room.
Right.
That table was a sacred space because it had a section for Ode.
Yep.
It had a section for me, which is where I kept my swan in honor of Brigid, and I kept my cauldron there. And then you had your side,
right,
which was dedicated to the Dagda and other bits of Druidism.
Right.
So that, because you were mentioning earlier, this art is everywhere, a sacred space in our home.
Right.
In our apartment, in our previous home, that was a sacred space. And so that is not a place where I would put my feet or, it was a coffee table. Right in the middle of the living room.
Very important key element. If you used to use this table to just put down cups or store things, it doesn't do that anymore once it's an altar.
Yeah, once it's an altar.
Which I had to be very conscious of.
It became a sacred space because we did ritual there.
Right.
And we cast spells there.
Right.
And we honored our gods and goddesses there. So, yes, various places in your home can become sacred spaces, individual from the entire home.
On the other hand, I used to work at a church and I set my drinks on the altar all the time. Have actually slept under one, so...
That explains so much.
But respect, and I think just practice is an important component of setting and using a sacred space. The more time you spend with it, the more... Because one of the keys of a sacred space is that it puts you in a certain frame of mind. Approaching an altar that you use frequently for a specific purpose should put you in the frame of mind to do that thing. Just out of habit, if nothing else, because your brain gets used to doing specific things and performing specific electrical impulses between neurons, and those become habits, and then every time you approach that thing, your brain goes, oh, I know what happens here. And
I think that'll be easier in this new space because we're basically setting aside about a quarter of our home.
We are,
to be an altar room.
To be altar, including, well, not just altar, but sacred space. Between this room, the podcasting room, / meditation space / reading room, and our actual altar area.
Which is just outside this room.
Which is just outside of this room.
Area.
So this basically
this whole good half of the house, really.
Well, a third, probably.
Of
the home is going to be sacred space. So, which I think is kind of dope.
And it'll make it more accessible. The more access you have to your altar, this is one of the reasons you have to have reliable access to an altar, or to a sacred space in general. It doesn't have to be an altar, but to a sacred space that you use for your work. You can never, at least in my experience, and this could be just because I'm an extremely territorial person, but I am unwilling to be cut off from my sacred space. Even temporarily. It was like I had to go through a whole process emotionally to break down my altars to bring them here.
And let me just say, for our brothers and sisters out there in paganism who have to be stealthy about this, who have very conservative Christian families or some other religious tradition, and they cannot have
or just judgy friends,
or just judgy people around them, they cannot have their sacred space be open to the public. You can have your altar, as we were saying, in a little sucrets.
In a mint tin.
You can have it in a shoebox.
I don't think anybody knows what sucrets are anymore.
Never heard of it in my life.
Altoids tin. It shows my age. Or even in a shoebox that you keep in a closet or under your bed. If it's where you hold the tools that you work with, the items that are important to you, that is when you pull those out, when you set those up, when you do your meditations or cast your circle or do your rituals, whatever, that becomes sacred. Period. Wherever you happen to do that.
It doesn't have to be big, dramatic, or public to be sacred.
No, exactly. And I think that's important, especially for people who are new to paganism and do have to remain in the broom closet, at least for a while. You can have sacred space right in your bedroom.
Without any tools at all.
Without any tools at all, because you're there. It's your intention.
Guess what?
What?
It's time for review. blues.
Pitched a little high this time. But it was nice.
It was good.
It's very melodic. I like it.
And I think the echo, again,
it's like being in a shower.
it's really good for the transitions.
It's like being in a shower. You know how you get really good
No, I don't, because I've never
shower?
in my life done singing in a shower. I have too much self-respect.
Oh, stop it. Everybody sings in the shower at some point.
Do not.
All right, so the book that we are
Yeah,
reviewing.
yes. The
Which
book
I think is very
it's
appropriate.
Right, yeah. We were looking through the books we were going to review this time and came on this one and we were like, oh, so there really isn't a choice here.
Right,
this
yeah.
is just the book we're doing.
Yeah.
So the book is called The Witch's Altar, The Craft, Lore, and Magic of Sacred Space by Jason Mankey and Laura Tempest-Zakroff. This book was provided to us free of charge for an honest review, and it comes out in November from Llewellyn.
Yeah. We've reviewed a book by Laura Tempest-Zakroff before, and we met her once, actually. She
Yep.
seems like a nice
Lovely.
person.
And Jason, both. We
Yeah,
met them both at
Jason.
Convocation.
Oh, that's right. We did, yeah.
Both
Yep.
at Convocation. Nice
And I
people.
read Jason's blog
Yeah,
Yep.
on Patheos.
Right, yes, which is his big thing, is his Patheos
He writes
blog.
some great
and
stuff.
this is a series of books that he's in the process of
Yeah.
writing. I think this is book 3 in that
I
series.
think so, yeah. The
So-
Witches, etc.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. So
This book is technically specifically about altars, but it covers some other subjects
It really
as
does.
well.
It does.
They
Very
talk
thorough.
about pentacles in there, which there was a long section about pentacles, and I don't use pentacles, so I didn't like super jive with it, but it seemed interesting academically.
It's actually really great information, especially for those of us out there who are witches.
Yes.
So read that section.
I mean, it makes sense that it would be for witches. It's called The Witch's Altar.
Well, I know what I mean.
and they're
It's for-
both witches.
They're both witches.
Right.
But any pagan could read this and
Yeah,
get
yeah.
a lot of information
Right.
out of it.
Right.
And I
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
they did an interesting thing here, where after or sort of interspersed throughout chapters, they had what were called alternatives.
Alternatives.
Yes, alternatives.
So
yes.
alternatives, but puns.
ALTAR.
And they were little inserts from people from other traditions on these subjects,
Which I thought was great.
Yeah, it was
they
really
had
nice.
A variety of viewpoints on all of these different issues.
Right.
Yeah, that was really nice. They had some conjure, some hoodoo voodoo
Yep.
perspectives. There was a
Heathen.
heathen perspective, witches from different paths and traditions.
Yep.
So yeah, that was very interesting, and I appreciated that a lot because it's very easy to sort of get your blinders on with this stuff and say like, my way is the right way.
Yeah. And I also like that it wasn't just certain types of altars. It was like they covered everything. They covered outside altars, seasonal altars,
Right.
indoor daily altars. I mean,
Yeah. And they
altars for all
and they talked a
occasions.
little bit about sort of the practice of coming to your altar on a regular basis,
Devotional altars.
interacting with it, keeping it clean, how to make different kinds of offerings, how to dispose of
My-
different kinds of offerings.
Creating altars with children, making it a part of your family.
Yeah. My favorite part of it was troubleshooting an altar.
Yeah, that was
Like, kind
interesting
of how to
too.
fix it. And
Is your
make
altar
sure
not
it's
working
clean.
for you?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Make sure
Consider
the
consider
harmony's
these
right.
options.
Right,
Right.
Which that was my favorite part of it.
Yeah, that
Which,
was.
took me to the end of the book to get there, but I kind of wish it had been earlier, but
It's not a terribly long book. It's 250, 275 pages. It's not 300,
It's a
I don't
quick
think.
read. In some sections, a
288.
long read.
Yeah.
In some others, there are a few areas I think that were maybe a little dry.
I thought and this may just be because it wasn't really for me, but the pentacle section dragged a little bit for me.
Sorry, Jason.
and Laura.
And Laura, yeah. It dragged a little bit for me, especially when we got to the part where it was just a series of instructions about different ways to make pentacles. Like, here's all the instructions you need to make a beeswax pentacle. Here's all the instructions you need to make a paper plate pentacle. And I was just like, okay, I get it. I get the gist. I can probably look up other ways to make pentacles online. Can we
Right.
continue, please, to the rest of the book?
But the rest of the book was good.
The rest of the book
I
was
thought
good.
the whole, honestly,
Right, yeah.
I like the entire book. I think it's a useful book. It's got great information, especially for people who are setting up an altar for the first time or
Yeah.
maybe trying to branch out from the altar that they've had. They want to do something a little different.
Yep.
It's really good information.
Yeah,
All right,
I
so
enjoyed it.
because I have to do it, out of 5 stars,
Oh, it hates the stars.
I know I'm at 3.5.
I give it 4.
4,
I give it 3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
So we're gonna add it. We're gonna end up at 3.75.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So
I also want to point out, we have to double check on the date. We can post this on the Facebook page or add it to the notes. But Jason Mankey is going to be at Arts and Craft talking about the book and
yeah.
doing a signing, I believe, at some point in
that's gotta
November.
it's got to be in November. 'cause
Yeah,
it doesn't
Yeah,
come out till
I'm
then.
pretty sure it's either in November or December. So
We'll get a
double
date
check
up on
date.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can find Jason Mankey all over the internet.
Everywhere.
He is
Yeah.
everywhere. All you have to do is just
Google his
Google
name.
the man and
Right,
you'll find him.
you'll find
Take
him.
you to his Patheos, probably his Twitter, who knows. I don't know.
So I would say at a 3.75 that Three Pagans and a Cat would recommend this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
recommend
I'll
it.
be reading it again. I got some really great ideas from it.
Browse it again, probably.
I'll probably dive heavier into it because
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I create
Yeah.
an altar correctly. And then this was more of a read it for review than read it for
Right.
car.
I don't think it's necessarily... I thought it was interesting. This book didn't say, like, here's how to make an altar. It
Right.
said, here are some options.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Well, and I think, and you just said something, you want to make sure you did
Do
it
it right, yeah.
Yep.
I don't think there is a right or a wrong way, unless you're in a specific tradition, I
Right,
suppose.
which has rules.
But for me, again, I'm intuitive when it comes to my altars, so there is no right or wrong way. There is just creating
What
an
she
altar
comes up
that
with.
works for me,
Yeah, but then that becomes your rules. I mean, there are rules to everything.
Yeah.
So even
like,
though
yeah.
you may create the rules, they're your rules at that point.
Yep. Yeah, like I don't put pictures of living people on my ancestor shrines.
Right.
That's a pretty common one, but it's not like there are people who do include the pictures of the living or pictures of the dead that have the living in them on their ancestor shrines. I don't do that because it doesn't feel comfy to me.
Right.
So photos that I have of the dead that have living people in them don't go on the shrine.
Right.
That's unfortunate when that's the only photo I have of that person, but so it goes.
Right, yeah. So interesting, feel free, if it's a photo that I'm in, just cut me out. Sharpie.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, apparently, like, every picture of one of my relatives, I'm in. So,
Photobomb.
well, I didn't have much choice. I was an infant when we were
Yes,
taken,
true.
so.
He was small.
My grandparents didn't live long enough for me to have, like, individual pictures of them, or any of my family before that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, cool. I'm glad we decided that we all actually like this
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
We
yeah.
did.
And,
Definitely recommend it.
recommend it.
It's very, very well written.
I wouldn't say I give it a strong recommendation. I give it like if you have however much this book ends up costing in your wallet and you're at the bookstore, go for it. Like,
Absolutely.
you'll probably get something useful out of it.
You will. I think people will find it very useful, especially, I would say this is especially good for beginning pagans.
Yeah. Not a must read, but a could read.
Well, and are we at that point where this is Odes wanting more information?
Yeah,
and
probably.
deeper?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably.
Now, we've talked about this before.
Yeah, there's
so-
definitely an extent to which I was looking for maybe a more theoretical text than this was. Like I said, I got to the point where we were like, here's 3,000 ways to make a pentacle, and I was like, I'm bored!
Yep.
Because I was interested in an academic way in the reasons for having a pentacle, and they talked about that. But after we got back past that point into the practical nitty gritty stuff about how to make various kinds of pentacles, I was checked out.
And for me, I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool. I might try some of these. Okay, let me skip along to the altar and mooncake recipes.
I'm physically incapable of
on
skipping
another
through a book.
chapter, so,
I can't skip through a book. I gotta read it start to finish. That probably also contributes.
probably.
When things start to drag, I can't just move on. I gotta get through it.
All right, so cool. I believe there was something else.
Oh,
with
yeah.
Big Liz, right?
Gwyn wanted to also review.
Yes, I did want to talk about, because, I was saying I
Right.
used Florida water all over my floors.
We used a very specific
I
Florida
used a
water.
very specific Florida water, which I got at Conjure Fest,
Yeah.
Detroit Conjure Fest, from Big Liz Conjure. And that's biglizconjure.com
Yep.
is the website if you want to check out.
I remember her booth, and it was very cool.
Yeah, and on the video that we did, the live podcast, we showed the bottle,
Yep.
and it's beautiful. It's got you can see the herbs and the flowers and everything that she added into it. And my lord, is it amazing! She says in her description of it on her website that it's not as strong as her perfumes or colognes rather. It's not as strong as the colognes. And I'm like, my God, woman, if this is not as strong as the colognes, your colognes must be amazing, because it made this house smell much better.
Yes.
Yeah, just on a purely practical
Just
level,
on a
it smells
purely
great.
practical it really does.
But it
it's
did also spiritually
it
sort
really
of
did.
clean out some of the gunk.
It cleaned out some of the gunk. As soon as I was done, I was like, this place feels lighter already. And we hadn't even done the smoke or
So
the...
what you're saying is, this place is clean.
Now we're going to have to watch that movie. Poltergeist it is. It's
Here they
October.
come. Here they come. The pop culture references,
That's
the seal
right.
has been broken.
That's right. Here they come.
Prepare yourselves, people. You thought we were different, but here's who we are.
And here's the thing: is I have actually got 2 Florida waters. I've got
Yeah.
one that I got
From Magnolia Rains.
Magnolia Rains from Box of Rain on Etsy. Again, one of our favorite Etsy stores.
Yes.
And I love that because that is perfect for a bath wash, a ritual bath. It's made with essential oils and it's wonderful for personal cleansing, I've discovered. But I really think if you have some serious spiritual issues that you need cleansing, there is nobody to go to but Big Liz. I mean, seriously, this woman knows how to make
I also just
Florida water.
I aesthetically am very attracted to all the stuff in the Florida water.
And
It's got a bunch of like whole herbs in it, and I'm very about it.
And I think it's just, honestly, I think it's just better than some of the stuff you might get that's sold commercially.
Yeah.
And that you'll find in...
Because it's not mass produced.
Exactly.
Right,
And what
yeah.
you'll find in the majority of pagan stores or online or whatever, if you're looking for some seriously powerful Florida water, I highly recommend BigLizConjure.com.
Smells nice, looks pretty, does the job.
Exactly.
Yep.
Put it on the bottle.
In fact, I'm gonna, and it's not cheap, but it is
No,
worth
it's
it.
not.
It is not. It's an expensive Florida.
Yes, we bought this one. This was not provided to us.
Right.
It's an expensive water, but it is worth every damn penny.
That's it for reviews.
Lovely.
Thanks.
A little shaky on the end, but
I
otherwise.
was running out of breath because I'm sitting down. If I'd been standing, I could have held that note
True.
for significantly
You did
longer.
Projection.
You
Yeah.
kind of
Diaphragmal
modulated
breathing.
a little higher than the first one. So I'd give it a solid 5.
Out of what?
What?
Out of what?
10.
Oh,
Wow.
rough.
I'm teasing. It was good.
Rough crowd.
Fine. Jeez, you sing it from now on. Miss, I have a degree in vocal performance.
No, that's your
She does.
gig.
She
That's
does have a
your gig.
degree in vocal performance.
I'm just teasing. He knows.
Whatever. I'm the one who has to sing all the intros and outros.
To be fair, you brought that on
You
yourself.
brought that on yourself, buddy. You did that
It
on
was
your own.
totally not my intention, but it has somehow stuck.
You created this monster on your
did.
own.
Yeah.
You absolutely did.
All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Yes.
Instead of family drama.
That's right.
Yeah, it's okay. That's what you get in this podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Family drama.
Family drama
drama.
and stuff about
A little
paganism.
bit magic.
And I'll be honest with you, people. This is what we're like all the time.
Yeah.
So
you
true.
Just get to hear it.
So true.
Especially for today for Lorelai, who is
On the Discord,
Discord
Discord.
listening, going...
Hi, Lorelai.
getting the
Okay.
undiluted,
the undiluted...
the unedited.
The pre-edited version of this.
Pre-edited version. You lucky person. You.
paid $10 for this privilege.
And if you have any questions, please do ask.
Yep. Yeah, Car is on top of the Discord.
That's
so.
right. That's right.
Lorelai loves it and is apparently laughing while crying.
Good. We're
I
very
hate
happy.
emojis because I'm like,
How do I
what does that
interpret
mean?
this?
that's laughing with tears, so I think that's, I don't know, it's something. It's
It's
like,
positive. It's
Right.
positive.
Positive response, which is good. That's what we want.
Accurate.
That's what we want. We have a good time, so.
All right.
We do. All right.
Next.
Yes. Another thing I wanted to talk about relative to sacred space is liminality. So liminality is the concept that there are places, specifically, frequently thresholds or certain groves of trees.
Ley lines.
That there are places where reality is kind of thin and you have easier access to other levels of reality
Just as
or
there are-
spirituality, for example,
Just as there are times
when things get frayed.
when things get thinner.
So the concept of a liminal space is one where it's easier to disengage with moral reality and engage with other layers of reality.
Such as Sedona. I know that Sedona is considered a place
Right.
where it's very easy to access the spiritual.
Right. There are arguments to be made that liminal spaces are, to a certain degree, inherently sacred, and they make extremely good sacred spaces intentionally. So, thoughts?
Well, I know that for one thing, let's say, for instance, Ireland, there are certain groves of trees
and stones
that the local people, they consider them
just don't
sacred.
touch it.
They don't touch it. They
Belongs
don't mess
to the
with
neighbors.
it. It belongs to the good neighbors, and so you just don't mess with it. That it's part of their
Plow
culture.
around it.
Exactly. It's they and we did. I think we were watching a documentary, and the farmer did. He just plowed right around it, did not touch it, because there was a grove of trees that is considered sacred.
There's folklore about elderberry trees that elderberry is a sacred tree and you're not permitted to cut an elderberry, even to prune it for any reason. The only way you can get elderberry wood traditionally, folklorically, is if a branch falls. If you cut the tree, you've offended the spirit and you're cursed now. So elderberries are, and elderberry bushes and trees and groves of elderberries, where they exist, are liminal spaces where witches and pagans like to converge to do work, because there's a lot of spiritual activity there.
There's a lot of spiritual activity, and there's many groves, and of course there's places such as Stonehenge, those places that are considered sacred. I think partly because of just the ancientness of them, but also the suspected
in a lot of cases we don't know actually.
For them.
In a lot of cases we don't actually know what the intended purpose of the thing was, but it's considered an object of veneration now.
Exactly. And there are some places, for instance, in the Catholic tradition, Lourdes, places where saints or the Virgin Mary have appeared. Those are considered sacred spaces. I know that there are places in Islam, the Dome of the Rock, I think is what it's called in Jerusalem, that, that's sacred to them. There's all kinds of places that are sacred.
So, counterpoint, liminal spaces, you might argue, receive a lot of traffic. Both physically, in terms of people visiting them, especially if they're well-known liminal spaces, and just spiritually, because that's where people come through sometimes. Is it problematic to establish a personal sacred space in a liminal zone that receives that kind of heavy activity if, like, for me, a sacred space is a place of peace and sort of quiet contemplation. Even if I'm doing loud work there, it's a place where I can reasonably expect not to have unexpected visitors, because I've set up, the boundaries of the space and said, these people can come in, nobody else can. A liminal space that traditionally gets a lot of traffic, would it be weird or inconvenient to set up a personal sacred space there? Even if it makes it easier to get into contact with that.
Well, I think it depends on where the liminal space is.
Right.
Is it a place that you can set up your own personal space to do work?
Well, but I mean, liminal spaces aren't necessarily big things. Like,
That's true.
Your closet could be a liminal space.
That's true.
Have you ever gotten the sense that there are monsters in your closet? Maybe there are. Maybe your closet, if you live in an
liminal
old
space.
house and that closet has a lot of spiritual traffic, thresholds make great liminal spaces.
That's how I found out I was a spiritual medium, a psychic medium as a child. There was a liminal space in my closet.
Yeah, that's pretty common. So if you've got like a liminal space that receives a lot of spiritual traffic that's in your home, for example, is it better or worse to set that up as a sacred space?
Well, I think it depends on what is coming through and what your relationship with it is. For instance, I don't think in the home that I grew up in, that particular closet would have been a safe space for me to set up a personal altar.
So, counterpoint. If you create a sacred space in a liminal space that has currently no wards, no gatekeepers, if you set up a sacred space there, you are defining its boundaries and the limits of who can come through it. Yes or no?
I think potentially yes.
So you could take an undefended liminal space, create a sacred space in and around it, consuming it, and as a consequence, defend that liminal zone.
I think that's potentially true.
So I have two things.
Okay.
One is, when did we become a PBS show? Counterpoint.
Sorry.
This is our.
I mean, you know who I am as a person.
I know. This is funny. It's like, all of a sudden we're a PBS show. Point, counterpoint. And Lorelai asked a question on the Discord.
Okay.
Would the idea of summoning things at the crossroads be an example of that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Crossroads are liminal spaces. Yeah,
there you go.
that's why they're
Perfect.
good for summoning. That's why they're good for disposal of used or completed spells.
Okay.
One of the strongest spells I ever cast, it was done at a crossroads in an apartment complex. But it was late at night. There was no traffic. It felt like a good space to me. I could sense that the time, the area, it was a good, thin place to do work. So I went out there and did work, and it was very powerful.
So, Lorelei, the question has been answered emphatically.
Yes.
Crossroads, traditional liminal space.
Yes, absolutely.
By the way, I just found out that you can find ley lines on Google Maps.
Oh,
Yeah,
neat.
yeah. I'm not surprised.
Would a liminal space also be a Gwyn's Garden Gems?
No.
Is your garden a liminal space?
Well, actually,
See, yes, that's what I'm
luckily it
saying.
is. It
Yeah,
is actually.
see?
It is.
Vindicated again.
He's giving victory arms.
Yeah, it is. Because, like, for instance, I was saying the balcony where I kept my herbs that
Was a sacred space.
It was a sacred
But was
space.
it
that
a
also
liminal
liminal
space?
space?
Did it get a lot of spiritual traffic?
It did.
Okay. Was it...
But I think it's because of the plants that I had.
Right, so
Right.
you were inviting...
Yeah, I was
spiritual traffic.
inviting that.
So,
that
by the way you created your garden, you were able to create a liminal space.
Generate.
Generate a
Most
So
of the time,
that's
liminal
interesting.
spaces... Yeah, most of the time, liminal
Now-
spaces are sort of
Inherent.
innate.
Now,
Yeah.
I will say that where I grew up, there was a liminal space in the trees in
the back 40?
Actually right at the edge of the yard before you got to the back
Was it that
40.
little grove of trees?
Yeah,
Yeah, I used to
yeah.
play there when I was a child and a teenager, and
Yeah.
that was my magic place as
Yeah,
far as
and
I was
that's
concerned.
because it was a liminal space.
Yep.
It was very, very, very much a thin spot.
It was a space in the forest where it felt both old and safe.
Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, I think you can create that, you can invite that, but generally speaking,
They just sort of exist.
They just sort of exist, and they can exist anywhere.
Right.
And I think that's why in Birmingham, even though it was a
building,
or in a parking lot, it was very strong. And I think that area beneath all that asphalt and housing, that was a thin space. It was a liminal space, so it could be used because inherently the earth underneath all of that was a liminal.
Yeah,
it
remembered
was a
whatever
liminal
it was
space.
before.
Exactly. Now,
All right, now let's carry on to the garden.
Now we're actually going to get to Gwyn's Garden Gems. And there are actually a lot of herbs and plants that can be used for sacred space because there are so many that can be used for purification. But what I'm going to be focusing on today is mint. Mint is extremely easy to grow both in a pot and in your garden. However, if you're going to use it in your garden, even grow it in a pot, be aware it's a very friendly plant.
It's a traveler.
It's a traveler. It likes to jump into other pots. It likes to go into the grass.
Mint is so easy to grow. In fact, you might call it invasive.
It is just a little bit invasive. However, it's very useful, not just
For mojitos.
Yeah, exactly. It's used to increase money, success, prosperity, and joy, fertility, and love. Those are just some of the things that it can be used for. It's excellent for purification. So it's very good to add either on an altar space in a pot for purifying the space, or even if you wanted to steep the leaves of the mint plant and infuse it into a spray or an oil and anoint your sacred space. You could do that as well because it is purifying. Again, mint, you can grow it in a pot. It likes to be in the sun, so you want to have it in the full sunlight. Needs water, but not too much because it doesn't like wet feet. But you do want to make sure that the soil is moist. You can grow it in the garden, but you do have to make sure it's pretty much by itself and kind of blocked in, maybe with some bricks.
You should really brick in mint and put it, ideally build like a break down into the soil to prevent it from rooting past.
out, because it will. It'll literally go under the bricks and into the yard if you're not careful. So,
and it will fight and choke out other plants.
Yeah. In addition to all its magical benefits, obviously, you have the health benefits. It can be used to ease headaches. It can aid digestion. It'll calm a sour stomach.
See, also purification.
Yeah, and it'll stimulate appetite. Mint tea is excellent for that. And there are a lot of varieties of mint, and any of these varieties of mint can be used for these purposes. So I highly recommend growing mint, and then you can dry the leaves and you can store them in a dry container that has a nice tight lid in a cool, dry place, and you can just steep it and use it however you want. Yeah, and you can also use it, make a tea out of it or an infusion. Use it to wash your floors if you need to for purification, as well as putting it on your altar. It's very versatile.
I like it muddled with some sugar.
Yeah, that too. So also, it's
Or
very
some rum over top.
very good in a mojito. 'Cause like I said, mint is primo, and you can grow it yourself.
And that's it for Gwyn's Garden Gems.
You just keep going higher and
higher
higher.
and higher.
What is that? What is that?
I don't know. Sorry. That's it for Gwyn's Garden Gems. Is that better?
Yes.
It's more in your natural register.
More natural, yes.
So let's actually talk about circle casting and hammer rights and those kinds of things, calling corners, the actual process of doing that.
Okay. There are a lot of ways to call a circle. Obviously, for me, mostly, honestly, it's done with my hand and visualization of the energy leaving my hand to create that sacred circle, which creates the sacred space. But a lot of people prefer to have something that's visual, so they can use a rope, they can use flowers, you can put a candle at each quarter, which the quarters represent the cardinal directions
and elements.
Directions and elements. So you can put a candle or some kind of at each quarter, which then creates your circle,
right?
Or
or your square, or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the other thing.
Your shape, your desired shape,
because depending on the situation, sometimes a triangle within the circle is appropriate, or a square within the circle is appropriate, depending on the spell that you're casting or the work that you're doing, and it also depends on your tradition. As you were mentioning, for some traditions, once you've entered the circle and it has been
closed,
you don't leave that circle, and someone is actually stationed to open a door for people to come and go if they need to. Oh, you can also use an athame or a sword, a wand, I think, can be used. Any of those things.
Traditionally, it's an athame, and then it's used to cut the circle, to cut a door into the circle.
So swords and athames are traditionally
That's
used
not
for
an ADF thing at all.
No, it's a Wiccan thing.
Yeah, that's totally a Wiccan thing.
Okay.
How are ADF spaces defined?
ADF spaces are defined oddly. We basically invite, I think we've talked about this before, where we invite the Shining Ones in, which can be anybody's deity who happens to be part of that public ritual.
Right.
Because
ADF is very versatile.
Right. Very versatile. And
which
then
I think
we
is cool.
basically bribe the outsiders to stay away.
Yes, I've seen that.
And
what does that mean? Explain that to me.
So the outsiders
would be any
undesired
or
spirits.
undesired spirit that would maybe cause an issue with you. We bribe them by basically like pouring out half a beer. And then offering them the other half after the thing.
I love that.
Right, yeah.
That's great.
It's one half bribe, one half blackmail.
It's essentially a libation, but done by half.
You hold half in reserve.
Right, yeah.
If you stay back and behave, I will give you the rest.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, it's
kind of like trying to get your kids to eat their greens.
Yeah,
You can have this cookie if you eat your broccoli, but it won't happen, so I won't get the cookie.
No cookie for you.
Which I would assume that happens sometimes, where the outsiders are just like, I don't care that much, I'd rather cause trouble.
Yeah.
And then I've seen people like up the ante to whiskey.
Okay.
So,
a more desirable
libation. Yeah. So people out there who do that.
And then I have more expensive whiskey than this.
Right, exactly. Let me pull out the 12-year.
I don't know if that's old for a whiskey or not.
It's kind of in the medium range.
Okay.
Whiskeys,
An acceptable whiskey.
It's a pretty good whiskey.
Okay.
Yeah, that's whiskeys
moving
go.
on from the whiskey talk.
Apparently this has become our alcohol episode.
Check that explicit mark.
Yes. So that's how we would do it in the ADF.
Okay.
So there's not a circle cast. Do you define the space in any way?
Not
really.
Just say
this is sacred.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So is it the space that becomes sacred, or is it just the actions that are sacred?
Nope, it's the space.
Interesting.
So anything.
But it's open so people can come and
go.
So
in kind of the same way that Gwyn will go outside and just perceive everything around her as being a sacred space up until she stops thinking about it.
Correct.
In the ADF, a sacred space is just everything around the ritual until you stop thinking about it.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
So how would you do it as a heathen?
How does that work in heathen?
I actually don't do it
the witch druid way.
Right.
You got the heathen way. Or
the
Ode way.
Right. I actually don't do it the way I've seen other heathens do it. I've seen heathens do what's called a hammerite, which, as far as I can tell, is basically Wiccan or Gardnerian derived.
Okay.
Where a symbol, either an actual hammer or a symbol of Thor's hammer, which is just you draw the outline of a hammer in the air with your hands, will be done at the quarters, and Thor will be invoked to protect the space, essentially.
Okay.
Because Thor is traditionally a defender of men and a slayer of giants.
Yeah.
Sure.
So you call Thor's attention down and say, like, here's the boundaries of the space I would like you to keep undesirables out of.
Right.
And then I have also seen some people do the bribing / threatening the outsiders thing.
Right.
Where it's one part like, you get a beer at the end if you don't cause trouble, and one part like, I'll smite you if you do.
Right.
I don't do any of that. Partly because I have a very open practice. I have a hard time with like hard notions of good and evil.
Right.
So to me, even the undesirables are like, I mean, maybe they're useful. Who knows? Have you asked?
Right.
Just like see if they have something to contribute. You never know. So I don't reject anything at the start of a ritual. I sort of wait and see. And if somebody causes trouble, I can always kick them out afterwards. I can firm up the wards and because I set what I call semi-permeable barriers.
Yep.
I create a specific space just with visualization. I say like the boundaries of this space are sacred for the purposes of my work. Usually it's within a specific room, so it's just like the walls are the edges of my sacred space.
Okay, so did you do anything when you all were out at the beach in St. Joe?
I did the walking thing that I told you about, where I just established a ring around myself, essentially as a sacred space.
Okay,
and that's purely visualization.
Gotcha.
And we were there. You know, it was pretty early in the morning. There were people walking by. There was a guy blowing sand off of the sidewalks, you know, and things like that. But we were able to even do a little ritual right there on the water's edge at the lake.
So I don't invoke anyone specifically other than Kla, I guess, who gets sort of an automatic invocation every time I set up my shield.
Right.
I don't invoke anyone's protection. I just like, these wards exist. They're always part of me.
Right.
Because they're made out of me-ness.
Right.
So I can
expand them
expand them to a specific range and set the parameters for entry, essentially. Usually I keep them sort of at a semi-permeable range, like if you're cool and we know each other, you can come in. If we're not cool and you don't know me, knock first.
Right.
Sometimes I firm them up to say nobody gets in until I say otherwise, and sometimes I bring them almost down and just say anybody who intends me intentional harm can't penetrate, but everybody else has a free pass for now.
Gotcha.
But I think the point of a lot of this discussion is, at least as far as I'm concerned, and perhaps you guys as well, I'm not sure, sacred space, it's not so narrowly defined.
No.
I think it's a much bigger definition than a lot of people realize.
Right.
And yes, it can be that narrow definition, but it can also be something bigger.
Or smaller.
Or smaller.
Right. And I think that it's a good thing that this episode came after our grounding, centering, shielding, because a lot of those same things apply to building your sacred.
Sort of the way they tell me you're supposed to learn math, where you learn basic concepts and they become building blocks to more complex concepts.
Right.
That didn't work for me with math, but it seems to work with magic.
Right.
If I didn't know how to ground, center, and shield myself, I wouldn't be able to, or I would have a very difficult time creating a sacred space, because I use those same fundamental elements just in a slightly different way, in a slightly different direction.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's relevant depending on who you are, what kind of a pagan you are, what your practice is, what your tradition is or isn't if you don't have a tradition, what works for you. How do you define a sacred space?
Well, and not everyone, I think there are probably people who just don't think about sacred space.
Right.
Who just do their work without ever
intentionally
creating a sacred space.
Unintentionally have probably created one.
Right. If you have a specific place that you work at and a specific altar where you do your work regularly, even if you've never cast a circle or intentionally warded that space, it's probably acquired a degree of sacredness just by the fact of your work there.
Well, I think is that it for this episode?
I think so.
I think we've covered pretty much everything.
We could talk about warding and enlivening gatekeepers and things like that, but that's sort of a separate topic.
That could be a different topic.
Okay.
We can do that another time.
Another day.
All right. So that's it for this episode number 21 of Three Pagans and a Cat. We thank you all very much for listening. One thing that needs to be said right now is if you live close to Mississippi, please drive into the state and download one episode.
Doesn't matter which episode it is.
Doesn't matter which one it is. I don't care.
He just needs that state to not be white anymore.
My God, please, somebody go over there and download just one.
Tint that state.
He's driving me crazy.
#Tint Mississippi.
Seriously, he's not even joking. It is driving him mad. So please.
He brings it up every time he checks the stats.
He does. Every single time he checks the stats. No Mississippi.
I'm sorry.
I was in a very forlorn tone of
It
voice.
was very sad.
But I would like to personally say, as Carr, and I would assume Gwyn and Ode would join me in this, is thank you guys so much for listening.
Yes.
Yeah, holy
It
shit.
has
Absolutely.
We've been absolutely blown away by the amount of listenership.
By the
we
support.
are now
By the interaction we get from you guys.
the interaction. We are now just over 49,100 downloads.
She's crazy.
It's amazing.
For 20 episodes, basically.
Yeah,
This is the
because this
21st
one hasn't gone
it's
up
not
yet.
First.
Which isn't it? Like, these are bananas numbers, you guys.
Oh, really? You guys
We thought maybe at the end of a year we'd have like 100 people who listened.
Right.
maybe, if we were lucky.
So that's, and just so you guys are kind of on the inside of this, that's an average of 2,455 downloads per episode.
And that just blows my mind.
Yeah.
And because
really
we do
does.
2 episodes a month, that's 5,456 downloads a month.
And that's all down to you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, you're listening, you're sharing, you're supporting us, you're talking on the Discord,
and
on
Facebook.
the Facebook, and it's just
Which
you're
I finally have my computer set up so I can check all these things again.
yeah, and because
Yeah,
Ode
sorry,
and I-
Stillway, on the Discord that it took me a bit to
Yeah.
get back to you, but I didn't have my computer until this morning.
Exactly. And just so that you know, once we get everything set up, it has taken longer than we anticipated, but once we get everything set up and we have permanent access to everything, and we've got furniture to sit on to do these things, I'm going to start blogging every day, Monday through Friday. I'm going to have
One a day.
a blog up there. It may be little, but it'll be something.
Right.
We'll start doing those recording of the
Yeah, we're going to start recording the previous blogs so that
Yeah.
you can listen to
previous
those.
vlogs and
I'm going to actually do the transcripts for the episodes because I promised to do those, and then we started packing,
Yeah.
and then we
Yeah.
started moving, and then
This.
that went on a lot longer than expected. So
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And of course, Ode and I will both be available for Skype readings.
Yep.
She does an amazing reading of tarot. She's a great tarot reader.
that is all I offer, by the way, is
She's
tarot
great.
readings.
She's an amazing tarot reader.
Gwyn has other services. I just do tarot.
I will be offering tarot and pendulum and spiritual readings at
Home and
home
office, home and business
Cleansings.
cleansing or clearings
Yes.
as well.
Yep.
yeah, if you're
If you're
having
close.
Yeah, if you're close. We're both going to be doing readings at Arts and Craft one day a week.
Yep.
Yep.
We're thrilled for the opportunity, and we honestly could not have done it without you guys.
And BTW, because Gwyn doesn't have a day job anymore, and I'm always at home, we're going to be working on that project.
Yeah,
that
the
book
book.
project
The book
we
project.
mentioned
Yes.
previously,
Yep,
which
so-
has been on the back burner this whole time.
yeah.
Yes.
Support us on Patreon.
Buy things at the Redbubble.
Buy things at the Redbubble.
Hang out with us on Facebook and Discord.
That's right. We'll be more available there.
You can get to all of those things through our website, through either the main page, I think, or just through the individual episode.
And in fact, I think that's where we're jumping in on Cars.
Yeah, I
deal,
think we are.
So we need to shut up.
No, I'm just going to let you all do it.
So he can, no,
I'm just gonna sit here.
No, you do your thing. But
Nope.
where can
Nope.
they find us?
Nope, I'm not doing it this time. You pretty much covered it all.
We ruined it.
We
So-
ruined it. Ah, come on, Car, please.
No, not going to do it.
Foiled.
You could find us at threepagansandacat.com. The scary thing is that sounded so planned and it's totally not.
It's not. It's totally not. But you have radio voice on now.
You can also find us on Facebook at 3PAAC, that's 3-pack. You can also find us on Twitter at 3_pagans, which I got right. Second time in a row. You can find us on Discord. You can find that link on our website. You can find us on Google+. You can find that link on our website.
YouTube.
You can find us on YouTube when we remember to upload the episodes. And I'm not going to read you all the digits that are there, but you know how to search on YouTube because you all are internet savvy.
You must be to have found this podcast.
That's this podcast.
So we are 3 pagans and a cat. That's 3 paths. One journey. No cat.
Yet.
Yes.
Thank you
Question
guys.
mark?
Thank you guys very much. We love you all, and
We
we
do.
will talk to you again next week.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, for Samhain. Oh my
look
God.
forward to the next episode. It's going to be Samhain.
gonna be Samhain.
All of this holiday.
It's like, we're going to make it awesome.
Since we're letting you all in kind of the inside, our number one episode to date is Mabon.
Yeah, you guys rocked Mabon, man. Oh my
Like
god.
absurdly.
That
Absurdly.
episode right now is at 3,910 downloads.
Everybody
The
loves the
frick-a-do.
fall holidays. I'm telling you, Mabon, Samhain, and then of course
It's not even that. It's the Wheel of the Year series is by far.
Yeah,
our
by
biggest.
far,
very
by far
popular.
the
You
most
guys have made
popular.
that
But
awesome.
we've talked about this, and next year we're going to do a Wheel of the Year series again,
2.0.
but more in depth.
Because we're all essentially learning as we go on this process. We've not always had the time or the knowledge to get into the nittier grittier stuff on these holidays. We've done a lot of debunking, and we've talked about sort of like the general gist of the holiday and given you guys some suggestions and correspondences and stuff. But there are ways to sort of crack these holidays open into deeper mysteries, as it were.
Yeah.
So,
we're
next
gonna
year,
try and find that.
next year we're gonna try some deeper mysteries of the wheel.
Yes, but now we've just we've like kept talking over our ending.
That's okay.
That's right. That's
It
right.
doesn't
So
matter. Our ending always sucks.
that's true.
That's
It's
true.
very
The
true.
beginning's fine. The ending always sucks.
Well, I wouldn't say it sucks.
It just sort of peters out.
It kind of peters out because we don't, really
Plan
know how to end
it.
it.
Plan it. I do these
Alright.
very formal intros and then download in Mississippi. Download in Mississippi. Download in Mississippi. Download in
You've been
Mississippi.
listening to Three Pagans and a Cat. Find out more information at www.threepagansandacat.com.